Good evening. I'm Andrea Anderson.
I'm Brian Allen. The South Dakota legislature passed several election-related bills this last session. One state political organization, however, is looking to stop a particular bill in its tracks.
State House reporter Grant Green has more on why the group calls the bill the tyranny of the minority in our top story here at 6.
Yeah, Brian and Andrea, today the Voter Defense Association of South Dakota laid out a list of concerns regarding House Bill 1169. But the biggest issue of all for the organization is that they say the bill will take away the rule of the people. Matthew Schweik, the president of the Voter Defense Association of South Dakota, cited several problems with the bill, including how difficult it would be to try and track down enough people from every district.
This bill would require circulators to carry petitions for each of South Dakota's 35 state Senate districts. It's already hard enough to get people to sign. Imagine having to carry multiple clipboards to accommodate any voter you might encounter.
In addition, Schweik said by making the collection process so strenuous, the people of South Dakota will only have a harder time getting their voices heard.
Just one state Senate district, if they don't like an initiative, could choose not to sign it and block it, even if the entirety of South Dakota, other than that Senate district, wanted an opportunity to vote on that constitutional amendment. Just one Senate district could block it. We don't think that's fair.
The legislature has already passed House Joint Resolution 5003, which will let the voters decide whether a constitutional amendment should take a 60% vote to pass. Former State Senator Reynold Neseba says lawmakers should ask a different question.
If they want to ban it, then they should put it on the ballot. Let the people vote on it entirely. But instead, they do this underhanded approach, trying to make it impossible for anybody to set up 35, basically 35 drives.
Governor Rhoden has until March 31st to either sign or veto the bill. Schweik told those in attendance that if Governor Rhoden does indeed sign the bill into law, he and his team are ready to put in the effort to get the bill referred to the ballot in 2026. Brian.
Grant Green.